Secret Art of Business. And today my guest is David Pullan. You are just a firecracker or lightning in a bottle, whatever we want to call it. But we talked a little bit before this, and you are just like the perfect person for this podcast about, having, you know, being driven, but yet having a whole lot of fun along the way. So why don't we start with you talking about the story spotters and a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Can I just say also thank you so much because I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I send firecracker kudos straight back at you. So I mean, I'm looking forward to this. The story spotters. We have been, and when I say we, it's me and my wife. I confidently say there are only two story spotters in the world because we made it up, basically. And the way it happened is for about 25 years we were a business called McKechnie Pullan Limited. I'm David Pullan. My wife is Sarah J. McKechnie. And nobody knew what they did. They sounded like a small town solicitor or a real estate firm somewhere. But I mean, what we did was we helped people with, essentially story and how they sort of owned the room when they were coming at leaders, teams, sales programs, change programs. And then back in 2020, when we all know what happened and the world stopped for a while, I was working online with a guy called Neil Bearden, who now lives in North Carolina, I think it is. And he's a bit of a rock and roll storytelling prof from INSEAD, the business school. And he asked me, he said, listen, David, I've got all of my stuff's gone online. I need some support with it. Would you come and help me out? And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? So I worked with Neil and we got on really well. And one day after class, we were having a cup of coffee. And he said, what do you do exactly, David? And I said, well, essentially, my job is to go into businesses, speak to the leaders when they're doing a change program or a sales program, whatever it is, and listen to what it is they're trying to achieve. And then try and find the stories that sit around the data and the facts that are really going to grab people's hearts, heads, and hands and really sit there and really sort of leap across, both off the page and across the room. So people go, oh, you remember that one when they said, and Neil said, oh, you're a story spotter. And I went, well, I am now. And since about 2020, I have been founder and director of the Story Spotters, and we help people in four ways. Help them spot, shape, and share the stories that they need to grab people's heads, hearts, and hands with. What stories do they tell by the way they show up in the room? Because we instantly make an impression of somebody by the way they walk through the door. How do you get stories out of other people? What stories are you listening for? And then finally, and the thing which I never thought would really take off, but has actually been the most important one, is what story are you telling yourself about yourself, which is going to either help or hinder you. So in a nutshell, that's me. That's the Story Spotters.
I love that because I too love the stories behind businesses. And I think that, and it's people in general, for the most part, one of my favorite parts of networking is just finding out more about people and what they did and their path, which is maybe why I started doing this. But there's no better way to engage a client or a potential client if they know your story. And I am the same way too. I will sometimes shop based on what the story of the business is. Can you elaborate a little bit more on some of that storytelling, especially the stuff that we tell ourselves? I think that is really a powerful thing.
Well, I mean, so one of the things, I mean, I originally trained as an actor, which, as I think I said to you earlier, my bank manager never quite understood because it's feast or famine in acting. So I worked as an actor and a relatively successful one for a number of years, but I also trained in other things. And one of those things was cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy. Now, I can guarantee that nobody watching this is going to start like clucking like a chicken because that's not what it's about. But really, I think hypnotherapy it's really about changing somebody's tunnel of belief, if you think it is. Who was it? What's her name? Ford, who said, whether you believe, I think it was Henry Ford, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right. And it was,
Yes.
That's the thing, really. What do we believe? And so the hypnosis stuff is really about getting people to believe things differently. I've got a client I was working with. In fact, she's doing a big sort of career-making presentation tomorrow that's really about her own personal brand. I mean, it's absolutely at the center of the business strategy, but her getting that right is really important. Now, she's really, really good, but there's this little voice on her shoulder that's saying, come on, really, everyone knows more than you. Everyone's better at this than you. And eventually they're going to find you out. So when I talk about, what story are you telling yourself, that's on a personal level. And then on another level with teams, one thing I'm finding a lot at the moment is almost what I would call internal startups. I have clients who everybody's going through big transformational change at the moment. And they'll say, right, let's get data, let's get marketing together and let's smash them together to form a team which is going to actually solve this problem we have, which is great. But this newly formed team has to form a story for themselves about who are we, what are we achieving, why do we want to be here, what do we want to get out of this, and how do we want to help. So it works on both a personal and an organizational level about its brand, really. Its brand, but it's a real
Yeah.
belief. It's a heartfelt brand, not just on the nice things on the wall.
Yeah. I did an exercise once that was essentially you physically turned around to look at the person you were and
Oh,
really think about, wow, from there to here, actually I've done some things, and it was really kind of, a very powerful exercise just in that thinking about where the how I was raised and all the struggles I went through to get to where I am today. And even that helped me change my story a lot.
Catherine, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that's one of the things that is central to my work is what I call what I don't call it's called the ABT framework, which is and but therefore, and it's famously used by the guys who created South Park. But Randy Olson, who today has published a new book called the ABT Framework for Medicine, has sort of brought this into the business, into the scientific world, really. I'm doing me and a guy called Park Howell in Arizona. I mean, that we're sort of right at the center of the business stuff. But it's that but bit, which is the really important thing, because I think a lot of people in business get into that thing of saying, oh, we did this and we do this and we do this and therefore, and sequentially, that is a story. I mean, it is a sequence of events, but it's just not a very good story because it's those buts, the struggles we overcome, the scars we've created, which really form us and show our values. Those show our worth. They show our strength. All of those things. So actually being willing to show the struggles, as you say, which go into making the person that sits here now or the organization that sits here now is absolutely fundamental.
And I think since you were an actor, or still, we'll say you still are an actor,
Thank you.
that if a story has no struggle in it, it's
Oh,
a pretty boring story.
no, it's never going to happen. I mean, that's the I can't remember because when I was at university studying, and I studied screenwriting as a big part of my course, and that was just one of the
Oh,
things that really struck me. And I can't remember who it said, but I mean, the basic model of any story is get your hero up a tree, throw sticks at them, and get them to find the way out of the tree. So I mean, that's it really. It's anything. I mean, Die Hard, to pick one off the top of my head. I mean, everyone is like, here's the normal world, but then something happens, and suddenly, you know, to go to Keanu's on that bus with a bomb on it. What's he gonna
like just
do?
regular guys that have this this big situation they got to get themselves out
Absolutely.
of. Now, those are both actually really perfect examples. Um, Now, you have created this great business with, like you said, with your wife, and you were acting. But what did you do as a kid that was just really fun and creative?
Well, I acted, funnily enough. I grew up in Australia, actually, and that
Really?
was, yeah, I did. Yeah, I grew up so despite what you hear here, I mean, there's 20 years of me being an Australian, which I grew up, and I'd always sort of my parents were English, and they trained at drama school in the UK and then moved to Australia and became teachers. So somewhere in the family mythology, there was always British theatre and British comedy and British television. There was all that stuff going on. Having said that, the main telly I watched as a child was my favorite Martian, I Dream of Jeannie and Gilligan's Island. So go
Oh
figure. So I
yeah,
mean,
yes.
that was the main thing I watched on TV as a kid. So I mean, that was essentially it. But there was this myth of theatre, and basically I was a dreamer. I was, I mean, it was, we're all storytellers as a kid. I just forgot to stop. And it was that was the thing, really. I mean, it was I mean, Australia, like many countries, I think, especially for men. I mean, they put a huge stake by how good you are as a sportsman. And sure, I played sports, but I played for I played fullback for an Australian rules football team, and I didn't touch the ball all year because this team was so good. This thing was about sort of 120 meters away from me, 100 meters away from me. I never saw the thing. I just stand there by myself making up stories in the goal at fullback, just waiting for, just and then getting off, never having broken sweat once. So, I mean, I did theater as a kid. I mean, that was the thing, which sort of, I heard somebody ask this question the other day, actually. Somebody said, what was the thing that made you weird as a kid that is your superpower now? Which I thought was such a good question. My weirdness
That
and
is a
the
great
thing that made
question.
me different. There you go. That was it. I was the weird theater kid, but just look at me now.
I might have to reframe my question to ask what made you weird as a kid, because
Great
I love
question.
that, because we did look at ourselves as like, am I the only one? But
Yeah.
it was essentially our superpower, and again, people just didn't appreciate it, I guess, at the time.
I know, and that's why I love what you said about looking back, because it's the stuff we did, and funnily enough, we've been doing some work globally with EY, the accountancy firm, on storytelling internally, about how they use story internally. And one of the
Yes.
exercises we do is my wife tells the story of her bear, her toy bear Julian. And Julian had a bit of a personality. He would march up and down like chief of police and arrest all of her sister's dolls and everything, and then sort of send them to prison and things like that. So, I mean, Julian had a real life. And then we get people to go away and tell the story of their favorite stories as a kid. These are people from all around the world who end up in a Zoom room together, from sort of Bangalore through to Texas. I mean, it's sort of, we've had them all in there. And it's amazing when people start connecting to the games that they played as kids, how little things of that have, bled into what they are now. The sort of like the figuring out stuff with games they used to play, and the way that they used to play sort of with what games they made their toys play that have suddenly turned them into an HR director.
And what I also like about when we talk about the things that we did as a kid, like you were, mentioning some of the TV shows that you watched. I watched a lot of those too, and
Yeah.
we start finding just these common things that we all have, which at one basically tells us that we're all a lot, closer than we think in our thinking and what we did and where we came from. But just also, like you said, just kind of creating that path of, if you were able to sit and watch I Dream of Jeannie for hours on end or whatever, you were able to make a career
Yeah.
eventually. So there
Yeah.
isn't, so we a lot of value in that time as a kid when we are just having fun, that can just turn into something that is just so much more valuable. And we need to remember that all of that is
Oh,
valuable.
because it's what it's what makes us special. And I think too often what happens is that as we get older, we have to fit into we buy a house and we have a car, and we have a 9 to 5 job and whatever, and suddenly those little things they don't disappear, but they just get the edges chipped off them. They get ironed down and pushed away,
Right.
and it's like, I mean, what is it that makes you different, makes you stand out? Because yes, we have these shared experiences, but we're all individuals. And I remember hearing the actor Jeff Bridges once being interviewed, and he was asked when he first went to Hollywood. I think it was Jack Lemmon said to him, he said, "You got to be different, kid." And it's like, I mean, there are tons of people who look like you here, and famously, when Robert Redford was starting, they said, "Throw a stick at Malibu and you'll hit 12 of them." But I mean, it's what makes you different, and I think that really sits right at the heart of our childhood, and how
Absolutely.
grab hold of that stuff. The weirdness. Back to your point. What's the thing that made
I
you
was going to
strange,
say,
that
you
makes you
got
great
to
now?
embrace that weirdo that you have, because that's what makes you different.
Embrace the
I try to
weirdo.
tell
I
my
love it.
daughter that, sometimes too, because there's always like that group of kids at school that they have like that, they're all the same. And when you're the weird kid, you kind of get a little, you're not taking it seriously or whatever. I'm like, oh my God, be the weird kid. The weird kids are the ones that
Well,
are going to go do something different.
and Catherine, don't you think that's getting even more prevalent now with the rise of social
Oh
media?
my
Where
gosh.
I mean, it's just I'm so glad my son is now sort of coming up for 30, and he was just before when kids had a USB point in their crib. He still read books and did drawings and stuff like that. So it was,
Right, right,
and which I'm really glad of now, because it's the pressure on people to conform or
right.
to find the gang that they conform to, I think is really, God, that's a huge pressure people are under.
Yeah. We're here for the weirdos though. Yeah. Be the weird one for sure. It's
Let's
way
hear
more
it for the
fun for
weirdo.
one.
Was it keep Austin weird? Keep the
Okay.
world weird.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So you got into acting at a young age, and then you pursued that for many years after that. And then what made you decide to start a business doing storytelling then?
Oh, that's great. Well, there's a good story there because I didn't decide; it sort of chose me. And the reason,
I love it.
yeah, I couldn't run quick enough. So the quick story is this: when our son was born, my wife Sarah Jane, who we'd met acting, and she made the very wise decision to try and do something which earned more regular money, but and didn't mean she had to travel away from home so much. And so she went to work, and I think this was probably the late 1990s this happened. She went to work for an organization which is when actors were going into business about what they used to call it impact training. How do you how do you own the room basically? And she was really, really good at it. And I was running a course separately in the sometime when I wasn't acting. There was a drama school that I worked for, and I ran a course for business people called Your Voice is the Business, which is about how they use their voice, but it also had some storytelling in there. There was one particular exercise I used to do, which was about, you know, listen to somebody else's story and then tell that story back as if it had happened to you. And it was always a story about something that they had achieved. And so I would be telling your story, Catherine, as if it had happened to
Mhm.
me. And you get people going, oh my goodness, was that me? Did that really happen? Wow, that's extraordinary. You could have heard a pin drop. Anyway, Sarah Jane, my wife, was working for this company, then started working by herself, and she had two massive contracts with KPMG, one in London and one in Zurich in Switzerland. And one day she woke up and literally couldn't get out of bed. She got chronic fatigue syndrome. I mean, it was and it was really tough. I mean, she couldn't move, and for nearly 2 years she was in a really bad way. Anyway, she rang up the partner in charge and told him what had happened. And I'm not 100% sure what happened, but I'm pretty sure his question was, do you know anyone who could take over? At which point I saw her go, yes, I think I do. And it was me. Anyway, within 36 hours, I found myself in Zurich, on Lake Zurich, coaching a team who were pitching for a massive piece of work on Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. And they could have been speaking Greek. There was great coffee, there was great chocolate, there were a lot of very nice three-piece pinstripe suits. I had not got a clue what I was talking about, or what they were talking about. At the first break, I said, let's grab a coffee. I'm just going to go and clear my head. You clear your head. Let's come back, see where we are. And I ran to the toilet and I called Sarah Jane on my cell phone. I said, listen, Sarah Jane, get me out of here. I will busk for the rest of my life. I don't care, but this is not for me. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, well, listen, I don't really understand what it is they're talking about. And she said, if you don't understand what they're talking about, you can be pretty sure they don't 100% understand it themselves. Get them to tell a
Oh,
story
wow.
that proves the point. It was the best piece of coaching ever. She said, get them to tell a story that proves the point. What's it going to look and feel like working with them? I went, oh, I could do that. I went back into the room and I said, come on, guys, tell me where have you done this? Tell me where you've done this before. What was it look like? Who was there? When did it happen? What were the conversations that went on? What's it going to look like for these guys? They told those stories. They incorporated them into the pitch. They won the pitch. And I thought, oh, I could do this. 20 years later, as I say, here I am as a story spotter, basically still doing that with a few extra bells and whistles of skills added onto it. So it chose
That's
me.
fantastic.
Thank you.
I swear some of the
was
best
very
jobs
much.
do, and that's when you talk about find the place that the holes, find the holes and fill them with your business idea or whatever. And I mean that's exactly it, and that it tends to be the more successful way to go, especially when you get to have the fun of creating it too. So do you
I think
still get the opportunity to act, or or have you just kind of wrapped all your creativity into this job that you have, which sounds like you kind of do too?
Yeah, it's a great question. The short answer is I don't do too. I still do some voiceover work, which I really enjoy. I just like
Ooh,
vocal stuff.
nice.
I really like I love a sound booth. I do like a sound booth because just making something come to life there. I haven't been on stage for probably about 5 years now. We did something, and it was semi-professional. It was me and a whole group of. I live in a very strange village in the southeast of England, which is there are 3 Oscar winners to my knowledge living here. I won't tell you who they are, but I mean, it's a very odd little village with a very creative bunch of people around it. And we were directed in a play by, actually, he's not an Oscar winner, but he was a very famous character in Game of Thrones, and his wife directed us in this play. So there are some strange things in the air around here. So that was the last time I acted, but most of my stuff is thrown into the creativity of this business. I love creating content for LinkedIn, little films. I've discovered a love of editing because, as I say, I did writing at university. Part of that was that, and then acting. And the thing I always was told about filmmaking is a story is told 3 times. It's told when it's written, when it's performed, and when it's edited. So I've really discovered a love of editing. And actually, there's another friend of mine. We used to create some films during lockdown, which we created a little channel for that on Instagram, and that got quite a following. Actually, just strange things edited together that made people laugh. So that's my creativity, really.
Yeah, and it sounds like you have a very infectious problem with it too, because you just keep making more things, which I absolutely love.
Well, it becomes like a
So what do you do?
disease, doesn't it? I mean, sorry.
It does. It does. It's like I have to do this. I'm just completely
Oh,
compelled. Do you do anything
it's
that to kind of completely unplug though? Like you're like, I'm just gonna take a walk. I'm gonna travel. I'm going to, bake a cake. I mean, do something like that to completely unplug.
me. Well, actually,
Yes.
you've picked. You probably picked 2 of the big ones. I love traveling. I love traveling. I'm a great believer in getting out of your environment and discovering the wonder of the world. So I love traveling. I Do you know, it's an interesting thing. I mean, and I do travel for work, and I'll often find myself in different cities of the world, and that often people say, "Oh, what was Copenhagen like?" And people will say, "Well, I don't know. I was in an office, really," and it was like you were just in a different location in
Oh,
another
yeah.
office. But I really, really make the effort to walk. If I can walk to the office, or we go out for dinner with a client at night and people say, well, let's get taxis, and said, do you know what? I'm just going to walk back. And that, I was talking to a friend this morning about that solo traveling thing in a city or wherever it is, really, of, you never have that question of, shall we? Because you can do what you want. If you want to turn a corner and go down there and discover that, I love it. So, I mean, so I love traveling. I love discovering new environments, and I love cooking. I love cooking. Really, that I will. It's funny that I like editing now as well, because one of my favorite things is to. I mean, there's a moratorium on recipe books in this house now. My wife will kill me if I ever buy another one. She doesn't know how many are in the Kindle as well. That's the thing. But I mean, despite the number of cookbooks I have, which I often buy for the stories of the chefs, there is nothing I like more than opening up the refrigerator and looking there and going, so that's what we've got, have we? What can we make from that? And just sort of like inventing with the flavors and stuff in there. That I can lose myself for a whole afternoon on that.
I absolutely love it. And I have really loved this conversation, David. I'm going to have
Uh,
all your information in the contacts for this podcast. So if people need to get in touch with you, or if anything, follow David on LinkedIn. I'm going to do that immediately after this,
please.
because if you are, putting up content continuously. It must be as delightful as you are. So I don't want to
Thank
miss out
you.
on that. So
Thank you, Catherine. Can I
thank you
say I've
so much for
really
doing
enjoyed it?
this. I really appreciate your time.
I've really enjoyed myself, Catherine. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
All right. You have a fantastic day.
And you.